What if the secret to truly letting go was not something you had to learn, but something you were built for? Something so deep in your body that even while you slept, it kept working, kept breathing, kept holding you exactly where you needed to be. Tonight, we are going to meet an animal that has known this secret for 50 million years. And by the time this story is over, your body will have remembered it too. Before we begin, if stories like this are what you need at the end of a long day, hit the subscribe button right now so you never miss one. Tap the like button to help someone else find this tonight. And drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. We love knowing who is with us. Now, let's go to the river. The sun is going down over an African river. The light is the colour of warm honey, thick and low, spreading across the surface of the water in long, flat stripes. The air is heavy with the smell of wet earth and river grass. Birds are calling their last calls of the day from the reeds on the opposite bank. And at the edge of the water, half in and half out, something enormous is settling. You almost miss it at first. The shape is so still and so large that the eye initially reads it as part of the landscape. A dark boulder, perhaps. A low ridge of riverbank. Something permanent and geological, rather than alive. But then the water shifts slightly around it, and two small eyes catch the last of the evening light, and you realize what you are looking at. A hippopotamus. It does not move. It does not need to. The river holds most of its enormous weight, and the remaining weight rests on the riverbed below with a comfortable solidity that speaks of an animal that has been doing this exact thing, in this exact position, in rivers very much like this one, for longer than our species has existed. The hippo does not look uncomfortable. It does not look vigilant or tense or watchful in the way that prey animals watch. It looks like something that has made its peace, completely and permanently, with the world it inhabits. There is a particular quality to the stillness of a hippo at the water's edge that is different from the stillness of other large animals. An elephant at rest still carries a sense of latent movement. The body poised, the ears turning, the trunk sampling the air. A lion resting in shade still has the taut quality of a spring that could release at any moment. But the hippo's stillness is total. It is the stillness of something that has decided, at a very fundamental level, that there is nowhere else it needs to be. The river runs past it. The birds finish their calls and go quiet. The sky deepens from honey to amber to the deep, bruised purple of an African dusk. And the hippo does not move. It breathes, slow and even, through nostrils that sit just above the waterline. The breath makes a small, soft sound, barely audible over the current. And then it is gone, and the stillness returns. This is how the hippo lives, not in the bursts and urgencies that govern so much of the animal world, not in the cycle of chase and escape that keeps smaller creatures in a state of perpetual readiness. The hippo moves through life on a different clock entirely, slow, deep, and anchored to the rhythm of the river in a way that has not changed in millions of years. We will spend tonight in the hippo's world. We will learn how it breathes, how it communicates, how it was shaped by evolution into something that looks like pure, effortless rest. We will follow it into the water, into the dark, and into the particular peace that belongs to very large things that have stopped fighting the weight of themselves. But first, there is something you need to know about this animal that most people never expect to hear. Something about where it actually comes from, and what it has silently in common with the last creature we visited together in these stories. If you spent last night with us in the Arctic, listening to beluga whales sing through dark water, then what we are about to say is going to feel like something the universe arranged on purpose. The hippopotamus is not related to the rhinoceros. It is not related to the elephant, despite the similar bulk. It is not, as many people instinctively assume, a close cousin of the pig. The animal that shares the hippo's deepest evolutionary roots, the family it split from, the branch it grew out of, is the whale. The hippo's closest living relatives are cetaceans, whales, dolphins, and porpoises, the same group that gave us the beluga. This is not a loose or approximate connection. It is one of the most significant, and, when it was first proposed, most contested findings in recent evolutionary biology. The evidence came from molecular analysis, comparing DNA sequences across species. And what it revealed was that hippos and whales share a common ancestor that no other living mammal shares. Somewhere around 55 to 60 million years ago, a single lineage split in two. One branch went to the water permanently and eventually became whales, and the other stayed on the land, or close to it, and eventually became the hippo. The split happened in what is now South Asia, in warm, shallow coastal environments where early mammals were experimenting with semi-aquatic lifestyles. The ancestor of both lineages was likely a small to medium-sized, four-legged animal that spent significant time in water, not yet committed to full aquatic life, but already more comfortable in the shallows than on open land. From that shared starting point, the two branches diverged dramatically in form over tens of millions of years. Whales lost their legs entirely and became fully marine. Hippos kept their legs, kept their land connection, and settled into the freshwater rivers and lakes of Africa. But the shared inheritance left its marks. Both hippos and whales are far more comfortable in water than their body plans might suggest for land mammals. Both give birth in water and nurse their young in aquatic environments. Both are highly social animals with complex communication systems. Both produce vocalizations that travel through water with unusual efficiency. The hippo's call, which we will come back to in a later chapter, travels through both air and water simultaneously, a dual medium communication that is essentially unheard of among other large land mammals, and points directly to those deep evolutionary roots in a world where air and water were equally present. There is also the matter of body hair, or the lack of it. Hippos are nearly hairless, their skin thick, smooth, and deeply sensitive to the aquatic environment around them. Whales, of course, shed their body hair entirely as they adapted to full ocean life. The hippo kept just enough terrestrial adaptation to stay land capable, but the trajectory towards smooth, water-suited skin is visible. And then there is the fat. Hippos carry a significant layer of subcutaneous fat that serves many of the same thermoregulatory functions in water that blubber serves in marine mammals. It is not structurally identical to whale blubber, but the parallel is real, and it points to the same ancient solution to the same ancient problem. How do you stay warm and buoyant in water when you are a mammal built to generate heat on land? When scientists first presented the genetic evidence linking hippos to whales. The reaction in parts of the scientific community was resistance. The animals look so different. Their ecologies are so different. But the DNA does not care what the animals look like. It carries its history, whether or not we find that history intuitive. The hippo resting in the warm river tonight carries, in every cell of its body, a story that connects it to the open ocean. Its great-great-grandmother, millions of times removed, waded into shallow water and felt the pull of it. One of her descendants went all the way in and never came back. Another stayed at the edge, in the rivers, in the shallows, in the warm half-world between water and land. The hippo chose the river, the whale chose the sea. Both found what they were looking for. Most animals sleep somewhere they go to. A den, a nest, a burrow, a patch of shade under a familiar tree. Sleep is a destination, a separate place, chosen for safety and comfort, apart from the activity of the day. The hippo does not work this way. For the hippopotamus, the river is not a place it goes to sleep. The river is where it lives. The water is the bed, the shelter, the temperature system, and the resting place, all at once. A hippo in its river is not escaping the world. It is fully inside the only world it needs. A hippo spends somewhere between 14 and 16 hours every single day, submerged or partially submerged in water. That is 2/3 of its entire life spent in a state of warm, supported, weightless rest. 16 hours of the body held by water, pressure taken off the joints, skin kept moist, temperature kept stable, while the hippo does essentially nothing except exist in the most comfortable possible way. This is not laziness. Every hour in the water is doing something essential. Hippos have a fundamental problem that the river solves. They are enormous animals. We will spend time with their weight later. Living in one of the hottest environments on Earth, with almost no body hair and skin that cannot tolerate prolonged direct sun exposure. On land, in the African heat, a hippo would overheat quickly. It would lose moisture through its skin at a rate the body could not sustain. The sun would damage the sensitive, hairless skin in a matter of hours. The river fixes all of this simultaneously. The water keeps the body temperature stable without the hippo needing to pant, sweat, or seek shade. It supports the animal's mass so that the muscular and skeletal system can rest completely. It keeps the skin wet and protected. It provides a medium in which the hippo can remain perfectly comfortable while expending almost no energy. The hippo has essentially outsourced its entire thermal management system to the river. It does not need internal mechanisms for dealing with heat because the river deals with heat for it. As the result is an animal that can dedicate the vast majority of its energy budget to simply being alive, rather than to the constant work of staying comfortable that other large savanna animals perform all day. In the water, the hippo often appears to be doing nothing, and in one sense, that is accurate. But in another, deeper sense, the hippo in the river is doing the single most important thing any living body can do. It is resting completely, then not the partial rest of an animal that is still monitoring its environment with one part of its attention, not the uncomfortable rest of something lying on hard ground with weight pressing down on its joints. The full, surrendered rest of a body held by something larger than itself, in an environment it has been calibrated for over millions of years of evolution. The water holds the hippo the way sleep holds us, not as a passive container, but as an active support, and something that takes the weight, something that makes the body lighter than it is, something that allows the deeper systems to quiet down and do the slower, more essential work that cannot happen while the full attention of the body is needed elsewhere. Hippos in calm rivers also demonstrate something that zookeepers and field researchers both comment on with consistency. They choose their spots. They return to the same areas of the river day after day, either the same patches of depth and temperature and current, the same neighbors, the same arrangement of bodies in the water. The river is not generic to them, it is specific. This particular bend, this particular depth, this particular combination of warm surface water and cooler water below, where the body can hang suspended at exactly the right temperature. It is, in the most complete sense of the word, home. Not a place the hippo came from, or a place it returns to after the day is done. A place the hippo is. A place that is so deeply woven into what the hippo is that removing the animal from it changes the animal in fundamental ways. In metabolism, in skin health, in stress levels, in social behavior. The river is not where the hippo rests. The river is the rest itself. When a hippo emerges from the water, something happens to its skin that stops people the first time they see it. A reddish, oily film begins to appear across the surface of the body. It seeps from the pores slowly, spreading in thin streaks across the grey skin, deepening in colour as it thickens. From a distance, it looks disturbingly like blood. The animal is not bleeding. It is not injured, but the reddish liquid keeps coming, and the hippo stands in the sun while this extraordinary thing happens to its skin, entirely indifferent to how strange it looks. This substance does not have a casual name. Old scientists call it hipposudoric acid, and the related compound pheidolic acid. Together, they form one of the most sophisticated biological compounds found anywhere in the animal kingdom. And the hippo produces it automatically, passively, without any conscious effort, the way human skin produces oils that keep it supple. What it does is remarkable. First, it acts as a sunscreen. The compounds absorb ultraviolet light before it can penetrate and damage the skin cells beneath. For an animal with almost no hair and extremely sensitive skin that spends significant time in direct equatorial sunlight during its nightly grazing hours, this matters enormously. The hippo does not need to find shade. It does not need to roll in mud as a substitute protection, though it does that too. Its own skin produces its sun protection from the inside, on demand, every time it is needed. Second, it acts as a moisturizer. The oily texture of the secretion forms a barrier on the skin surface that slows water loss, keeping the skin from drying and cracking during the hours the hippo spends on land. This is significant for an animal whose skin is designed to be wet and whose time out of water, though relatively short, exposes it to very dry, hot air. Third, and this is the part that surprised researchers most when they studied the compound in detail, it is a powerful antibiotic. So the same oily secretion that provides UV protection and moisture retention has measurable antimicrobial properties. It inhibits the growth of bacteria on the skin's surface. For an animal that lives in warm, shallow fresh water, one of the most bacteria-rich environments on the planet, shared with other large mammals, crocodiles, and a constant flow of organic matter. This protection is not minor. It is critical. Hippos spend their days in conditions that would cause serious skin infections in most animals within a matter of days. Warm water, broken skin from the inevitable physical contact of a pod, sharing a small stretch of river, wounds from occasional conflict, constant exposure to a microbial environment that is, in purely biological terms, aggressive. And yet, hippos, when living in healthy natural conditions, rarely show the kind of chronic skin infections you might expect given those conditions. And the secretion is a significant reason why. The reddish color of the compound comes from its molecular structure, which includes iron-containing compounds. This is why, in bright sunlight, the secretion can look darker and more intensely red than in shade, and why early observers and travelers encountering hippos for the first time genuinely believed they were seeing an animal that sweated blood, and the description appeared in ancient texts from multiple cultures across Africa and the Mediterranean world. It made the hippo seem simultaneously exotic and wounded, an enormous bleeding animal that somehow didn't mind. But the hippo does not bleed. It self-protects in a quiet, automatic, completely unspectacular way that happens without effort or attention from the animal itself. The skin reads the conditions: sun exposure, time out of water, the temperature, and responds by producing exactly what is needed. The system is entirely self-managed. There is something deeply restful about that idea. The body knowing what it needs. The body providing it, without the conscious mind needing to direct or worry or intervene. The animal simply stands in the sun, and its skin does its job, and that is enough. The hippo does not think about any of this. It stands at the river's edge in the early morning light, its skin slowly flushing with the reddish oil that will carry it through the day, and it watches the river with the same calm, incurious patience that it watches everything. The body takes care of itself. It always has. There is a widespread assumption about hippos and water that turns out to be wrong in the most quietly wonderful way. People assume that an animal spending 16 hours a day submerged must be a strong swimmer. They picture the hippo moving through the river the way a seal moves, sleek, propelled, at home in the full volume of the water. But the hippo does not swim. Not really. Not in the way we mean when we use that word. The hippo walks. When a hippo enters deeper water and its feet leave the riverbed, it does not begin to paddle or stroke or kick in any of the ways mammals typically move through water. Instead, it does something that takes a moment to process when you first see the footage. It pushes off the bottom in a slow, powerful bound and rises through the water column in a gentle arc, then settles back down and pushes off again. It is running in slow motion through a medium that is 4 times denser than air. Each bound carries it further than the equivalent movement on land would, and the water provides just enough resistance to make every movement deliberate, measured, and smooth. The result is a gait that has no real equivalent on land. Large, slow, weightless strides that cover the riverbed in a rhythm more like a dream of running than the thing itself. The body barely tilts. The enormous head stays level. The legs push and release in a cadence that is, by any measure, deeply graceful for an animal of this size. The hippo's body is not designed to float. Its bone density is significantly higher than most mammals. A dense skeleton that provides ballast and keeps the animal from bobbing uncontrollably at the surface. This is the same evolutionary adaptation found in other semi-aquatic and aquatic mammals that need to stay down rather than up. It means that in deeper water, a hippo naturally sinks to the bottom, and the bottom is where it prefers to be. The riverbed is solid, known, and manageable. The open water column is less so. This high bone density comes at a cost on land. The weight carried by the hippo's legs when it is fully out of the water is enormous, and the hippo is not built for extended land movement. Its legs are short and columnar, designed to support weight rather than generate sustained speed. On flat ground over short distances, a hippo can move faster than a human. In short bursts that most people find startling when they first encounter the data. But that speed comes at high metabolic cost and cannot be sustained. In the water, that cost disappears. The dense bone that makes the hippo heavy on land makes it perfectly ballasted in the river. The weight that the legs strain against in air is handed over to the water, which accepts it without complaint. The same body that works hard on land barely works at all in water. The same mass that is a burden on the bank becomes an asset on the riverbed. So watch a hippo moving along the bottom of a clear river, and the word that keeps returning is not power, though the animal is enormously powerful. The word is ease. There is an ease to the movement that is out of all proportion to the size of the animal producing it. Each push-off is slow and complete. Each arc through the water is unhurried. There is no visible effort, no strain, no sense of an enormous body fighting a medium it does not belong in. The hippo belongs in the water, not in the leaping, energetic way of dolphins playing in bow waves, but in the way of something that the water was shaped to hold, something that arrived at this environment long ago and discovered that the water had been waiting for exactly this much weight, this exact density, this specific shape. The riverbed receives the hippo's footsteps the way a mattress receives a body at the end of a long day. The pressure is enormous, and the yield is perfect. Every stride releases weight. Every push-off is a small, unhurried letting go. Sound travels differently in water than it does in air. In air, sound moves at roughly 343 meters per second, spreading outward in waves that diminish with distance and are disrupted by wind, terrain, and the absorption of the atmosphere. In water, sound moves nearly 5 times faster, travels further with less energy loss, and passes through the bodies of animals in the water rather than simply around them. These two mediums are, acoustically, almost entirely different worlds. Most land animals produce sound for air. Most aquatic animals produce sound for water. Very few creatures bridge both. The hippo does. When a hippo vocalizes, producing the deep, resonant, multi-toned call that carries across a river and into the surrounding landscape, it produces that sound simultaneously in both air and water. The call is not two separate sounds. It is one sound that travels in 2 directions at once, behaving differently in each medium, reaching different recipients through different physical pathways. Above the waterline, the sound travels through the air to other hippos, to other animals, to the broad acoustic environment of the riverbank. Below the waterline, the same sound propagates through the water and through the substrate of the riverbed itself. reaching hippos further downstream who may be fully submerged and unable to hear the airborne version at all. So researchers studying hippo communication have found that the submerged portion of the call, the part traveling through water and sediment, carries surprisingly detailed information. Hippos receiving the underwater component of a call can identify individual animals from it, discern emotional state, and locate the direction of the caller. They respond to it. The communication is real and functional, not just a physical side effect of a land animal calling near water. This makes the hippo one of only a handful of large mammals known to communicate across two physical mediums simultaneously. The mechanism by which it achieves this is not fully understood, but it appears to involve both the traditional airborne route, through the vocal cords and out of the open mouth or nostrils, and a parallel route through bone conduction, where vibrations travel through the jaw and skull into the water and substrate below. The jawbone, resting against or near the water's surface or the riverbed, acts as a kind of transducer, converting the vibrations of vocalization into underwater sound. This is again a mechanism shared with whales and dolphins, whose acoustic communication relies heavily on bone conduction and is designed specifically for water. The hippo has not developed the full cetacean acoustic suite. It has not needed to, because it is not fully aquatic. But the inheritance from that ancient shared ancestor is visible here, in the bone structure of the jaw and skull, in the ability to pass sound through solid matter, in the instinctive use of both mediums at once. Hippos call most actively in the early morning and late evening, during the transitions between their daytime water rest and their nighttime grazing. A chorus of hippo calls along a river at dusk is one of the most immediately recognizable sounds in the African acoustic landscape. It is loud, deep, and carries an almost physical quality. You feel it as much as you hear it if you are close enough. Honks and rumbles and long, resonant exhalations that roll across the water and into the trees on the far bank. But underneath all of that, beneath the surface you cannot see from the bank, the same sound is traveling a second journey. Through the warm river water, past the submerged bodies of other resting hippos, along the silt and rock of the riverbed, downstream to animals a kilometre away, who are lying still and quiet with their chins touching the bottom. They hear it. They know who it is. They know what it means. And in the unhurried way of animals that have been communicating this way for millions of years, they respond. Two worlds, one voice. The river carrying the message in both directions at once. When a hippo calf enters the world, it does not arrive into open water. The mother, in the days before birth, thus moves away from the main group and finds a shallow, protected section of the river, or a sheltered pool at its edge. The water here is calm and warm, far enough from the deeper channel that the calf will not be swept away, close enough to the main pod that the sounds of the group are still audible. The birth happens in the water. The calf surfaces within seconds. Instinctively, the reflex already operating before the animal has taken its first conscious breath. It weighs roughly 40 kilograms at birth. By hippo standards, this is small. By the standards of most other land mammals, a 40-kilogram newborn is enormous. But the calf looks almost toy-like beside its mother, who may outweigh it by a factor of 100. The calf stays close to her flank from the first minutes, navigating the water in the instinctive slightly uncertain way of a newborn learning what its body can do. It can nurse underwater. This is unusual enough that it is worth pausing on. Most mammals that live near water carry their nursing routines out in air. The calf surfaces, feeds, and returns. The hippo calf can submerge and nurse simultaneously, sealing its nostrils and ears against the water in the same automatic way that allows hippos to sleep underwater. The mechanics of underwater nursing involve the mother positioning herself at a depth the calf can manage, and the calf latching on below the surface and feeding in short, repeated bouts, resurfacing to breathe and submerging again in a rhythm that becomes second nature within hours. After the first days, the mother returns to the main pod with her calf. And here is where the hippo's social structure reveals one of its most important and least discussed features. Female hippos raise their calves within nursery groups, loose clusters of mothers and young animals that move and rest together within the pod's territory. These groups are not random, and they consist primarily of related females and their offspring, held together by bonds that go back years and in some cases decades. The adult females in a nursery group know each other. They have rested in the same stretches of river for most of their lives. And when young animals are present, the group functions with a protectiveness that is distributed rather than solely maternal. A calf in a hippo nursery group is not watched over only by its mother. It is surrounded by adult females who are alert to it, who position themselves between it and any perceived threat, who respond to its calls, who notice if it has moved away from the group's safe zone, and whose presence in the water collectively creates a perimeter of safety around the most vulnerable members of the pod. The calves, for their part, learn the river from this group. They learn which sections of the bank are safe to graze from at night, and they learn the sound signatures of the adult calls, who is who, what each call means, when a particular rumble signals something they need to pay attention to, and when it is simply the background conversation of a resting group. They learn the temperature gradients of the river, the spots where the water is warmest in the morning, the shallow areas that stay comfortable longer into the hot part of the day. This is education that happens in the water, through proximity and repetition, without any formal instruction. The calf learns by being there, by floating alongside animals who have been there for decades, by absorbing, through daily experience, the accumulated river knowledge of the group. And as the months pass, the calf grows larger and darker and more confident. Its movements in the water become less tentative. Its position in the nursery group shifts gradually from the very center, most protected, closest to the mothers, toward a slightly wider orbit as it develops the capacity to manage itself. It does not move far, not yet. The river is still enormous, and the calf is still learning. But the water is already familiar. The group is already known. The river has already become home. When the last light leaves the African sky, and the river settles into full dark, something changes along the bank. The hippos begin to move. Not in the river, out of it, one by one, or in small groups. The heavy shapes that have been resting in the water all day haul themselves up the bank and onto land. The movement is slower than you would expect, and more deliberate. The body that was nearly weightless in the river is fully heavy now, every kilogram of it pressing down through 4 short legs onto the earth. But the hippos move with the unhurried certainty of animals following a path they have followed 1,000 times before. They are going to eat. Hippos are grazers, and their diet is almost entirely grass. Short, dense, nutritious grass that grows along the floodplains and riverbanks of sub-Saharan Africa. They do not eat aquatic plants to any significant degree, which surprises most people given how much of their lives they spend in water. The water is for resting. The land, specifically the grassland close to the river, is for feeding. And because the African sun makes daytime grazing on open grassland dangerously hot for an animal with the hippo's thermal limitations, the feeding happens at night. A grazing hippo on a dark African floodplain is a different animal from the still, half-submerged shape of its daytime river presence. It moves, steadily, methodically, covering ground with a purpose that is at odds with its reputation for immobility. A single hippo can travel up to 10 kilometers from the river on a good grazing night, moving along routes so consistently used that they are worn into the landscape. Deep, wide trenches in the earth, the grass on either side pressed flat by the passage of enormous bodies over years and decades. These paths are ancient. In many hippo territories, the grazing routes have been maintained for so long, used by the same population, generation after generation, following the same lines across the same landscape, that they have become permanent features of the terrain. They channel rainfall runoff. They shape where vegetation grows and where it does not. They connect the river to the grassland in lines that predate the memories of any living animal using them. Some of these paths were being walked by hippos before the people who now live nearby had arrived in the landscape. The hippo, on its nightly route, does not rush. It walks at roughly 8 kilometers per hour, a steady, rolling gait that covers ground efficiently without exhausting the body. The head stays low, close to the grass. The wide, flat mouth, equipped with a row of horny pads rather than teeth in the front, designed precisely for cropping short grass, moves rhythmically, pulling up mouthfuls of vegetation and processing them with the slow, complete chewing of a grazing animal at the full depth of its calm. There is no anxiety in a hippo grazing at night. No scanning for threats, no interrupted feeding, no nervous circling before settling. The hippo simply eats, moving steadily along the path, covering the ground, taking what it needs from the grass that the African floodplains have reliably provided for millions of years. The night is warm and full of sound. Insects, nightjars, the distant call of other hippos still in the river. The grass is wet with dew. The sky above the floodplain is open and wide, full of stars that are far brighter here, away from any artificial light, than they are anywhere near human habitation. And the hippo moves through all of it without hurry, not because it is incapable of urgency. It is capable of urgency when urgency is called for. But urgency is not called for tonight. Tonight, the grass is here, the path is here, the river is behind, and will be there when it is time to return. Before the sun rises, the hippo will have eaten enough to fuel 2/3 of a day spent doing almost nothing at all. Then it will walk the path back to the water, ease itself down the bank, and settle back into the warmth of the river. The land was for the night. The river is for the rest. A fully grown male hippopotamus weighs between 1,500 and 4,500 kilograms. To put that in terms the body can feel, it is the weight of a small car, or 3 large grand pianos, or roughly 60 adult human beings, compressed into a single animal that stands about 1.5 meters tall at the shoulder. It is an almost incomprehensible mass for a land-capable animal, and it shapes every aspect of the hippo's life in ways both obvious and subtle. On land, the weight is a constant fact. The hippo's legs, short, thick, and pillar-like, are built entirely for load-bearing rather than speed or agility. The joints carry enormous compressive forces with every step. The muscles of the back and core are perpetually engaged simply to hold the body in its upright posture. Walking any significant distance on land costs the hippo far more energy than the same distance would cost most other animals of equivalent size, because equivalent size in most species comes with a longer leg, a better mechanical lever for carrying weight efficiently. The hippo's compact build, useful for aquatic stability, makes terrestrial movement metabolically expensive. This is why, and during the heat of the day, the hippo does not walk. It is not a choice made out of preference for comfort. It is a physiological necessity. The energy cost of moving that mass through air, combined with the heat generated by doing so, would be unsustainable in the direct equatorial sun. The hippo must rest. The river makes resting possible. In water, the weight becomes something else entirely. Buoyancy does not eliminate the hippo's mass. It is still there, every kilogram of it. But water redistributes that weight from the legs and joints and spine, which bear it entirely on land, to the whole surface area of the body, which the water supports from every direction simultaneously. The pressure that concentrated down through 4 contact points on land spreads across the entire body in the water. No single part of the skeleton is carrying what it carries on land. The joints decompress. The muscles along the spine release. The body, for the first time in its day, is not working against its own weight. Zoologists studying hippo skeletal health have noted that the bones and joints of wild hippos show remarkably low rates of the degenerative changes that you might expect in an animal carrying this much weight. The reason is the river. Those 14 to 16 daily hours in water are not just comfortable, they are protective. The daily decompression of the skeleton in water counteracts the compression of the hours spent on land. The river is, in a very literal sense, keeping the hippo's body functional. Think about what this means in the language of the body you are in tonight. The weight you carry is not only physical. The compression of a long day accumulates in the shoulders, the neck, the lower back, in the places where the tension of being upright and alert and moving through a world that makes demands concentrates itself. The body carries the day's weight long after the day is done. It needs, as much as the hippo needs the river, a place to decompress, a medium that will take the weight of the parts that have been bearing it. That is what sleep is for the human body. The nightly river. The hours during which the spine decompresses, the joints release. The muscles that have been working since morning finally let go. The weight does not disappear, but it is redistributed, handed over to the mattress, to gravity, and to the horizontal position that removes the compressive load from the vertical spine and lets the body do the deeper work of repair. The hippo knows this without knowing it. Its entire existence is organized around the principle that an enormous weight, given a place to release itself, becomes something manageable. something sustainable, something that does not wear the body down, but is simply carried as it should be in the right conditions. The river receives the weight without flinching, and the body exhales, and the hippo, for the 16th hour, is finally completely unburdened. The hippo's skull was built for a life lived at the boundary between two worlds. Look at a hippo face-on, and you notice immediately that the eyes sit very high, not on the sides of the head the way most large mammals carry them, but close to the top of the skull, elevated and forward-facing, enough to see what is ahead, while the rest of the face is below the waterline. The ears sit at the same height, and the nostrils sit just slightly lower, but still well above where the mouth and jaw descend into the water. These three sensory openings, eyes, ears, nostrils, form a tight cluster near the top of the head, like instruments arranged on the surface of a periscope. The design is precise and intentional in the evolutionary sense. A hippo resting in deep enough water can present only this cluster of features above the surface, perhaps 5 centimeters of exposed face, while the entire rest of its body, from its enormous jaw to the full 4 tons of its back and flanks, remains hidden below. From a distance, a resting hippo in deep water looks like nothing more than a small, flat rock in the river, something the eye passes over without registering. This is camouflage of a very specific and functional kind, but the eyes themselves are what reward the closest attention. Hippo eyes are large, amber brown, and set within a raised orbital socket, a bony ring of skull that juts slightly forward, protecting the eye the way a brow ridge protects a human eye from impact. In bright light, the pupil contracts to a narrow horizontal oval, a pupil shape shared by many prey animals and grazing mammals, providing a wide-angle field of view along the horizontal plane where threats typically approach from. In low light, the pupil opens wide, drawing in as much light as possible for the nocturnal grazing hours when good vision matters most. Below the surface, the eyes are protected by a transparent nictitating membrane, a third eyelid that closes over the eye when the hippo submerges, functioning as a natural pair of goggles. The membrane is thin enough to allow some visual input through it, so the hippo is not entirely blind underwater. But its primary underwater navigation tool is not vision. In the murky, particle-laden water of most African rivers, vision does not carry very far. The hippo navigates the underwater world by touch, by the pressure-sensitive receptors in its skin, by its sense of the riverbed beneath it, and by the acoustic information carried through the water, the calls and vibrations we explored in the previous chapter on vocalization. What the hippo's eyes are designed for, above all else, is the surface. From its resting position in the water, with just the top of its head exposed, the hippo has a panoramic view of the world above the waterline. It sees the bank on both sides. It sees movement in the grass. It sees the sky and the position of the sun, which it uses as a temporal reference for when to begin moving toward the bank for the evening. It sees other hippos, other animals, and any approaching change in the environment, while itself remaining almost entirely invisible to whatever it is watching. And there is a quality to this particular perspective. Half in, half out, seeing the surface world from just below it. That is unique to the hippo and a handful of other semi-aquatic animals. It is a view from the threshold, a position that belongs fully to neither world but has access to both, Researchers who have spent time watching hippos from close range at the water's edge describe a particular quality of attention in the animal's eyes that is hard to categorize but consistently remarked upon. The hippo watches, not nervously, not with the rapid, reactive attention of a prey animal in open ground, but steadily, with a calm and thorough awareness, as if it is taking in everything without being disturbed by any of it. The world above the water goes about its business, and the birds land and take off from the bank. The other animals come to drink in the afternoon light. The human observer sits very still and tries to look as unthreatening as possible. And the hippo, eyes just above the waterline, watches all of it with the unhurried patience of something that has been doing exactly this, in this exact place, for a very long time. The hippo does not think of itself as an engineer. It does not plan. It does not survey the landscape and decide where water should flow or where vegetation should grow. It does not make choices about the ecosystem with any awareness that it is making choices at all. It simply lives, moving along the same paths, wallowing in the same pools, grazing on the same floodplains, returning to the same river, and in doing so, quietly and completely reshapes the world around it. And the technical term for an animal that significantly modifies its environment through the ordinary business of its existence is ecosystem engineer. The beaver is the most commonly cited example. Damming rivers, creating wetlands, altering hydrology across entire watersheds through the act of building a home. But the hippo's influence on African river systems is arguably as significant as the beaver's and far less discussed. Begin with the paths. In the grazing routes that hippos follow every night are not shallow impressions in the grass. They are deep, wide trenches, sometimes half a meter deep and a meter wide, carved into the earth by the repeated passage of enormous bodies over decades and centuries. The weight concentrated through 4 hooves at each step, multiplied by thousands of journeys, compresses and displaces the soil in a way that eventually creates a permanent channel. When the rainy season comes and water moves across the floodplain, it finds these channels and follows them. The hippo paths become drainage routes, directing rainfall from the uplands down toward the river in specific, predictable lines. This shapes which areas flood and which stay dry, which areas develop the dense, nutritious shortgrass that hippos prefer to graze on, and which develop different vegetation communities. The hippo's path, in walked for reasons that have nothing to do with hydrology, becomes a hydrological feature of the landscape. The animal's habit becomes the land's architecture. Then there is the wallowing. Hippos create wallows, shallow depressions in the earth near the river's edge, filled with mud and water, by the simple act of lying down and moving around in the same place repeatedly. A wallow, used by multiple hippos over years, deepens and widens until it becomes a permanent water feature, a small pool, separate from the main river, that holds water even in the dry season when the surrounding land bakes hard. These pools are not irrelevant to the wider ecosystem. They become water sources for birds, insects, reptiles, and other mammals during dry periods when the main river may be the only other accessible water. They create patches of dense, wet vegetation in landscapes that are otherwise seasonal in their moisture. They are, in biological terms, on hotspots, places of concentrated biodiversity that exist because a hippo found that particular piece of ground comfortable and kept returning to it. The nutrients the hippo brings from the land to the river are another dimension of this engineering. A pod of hippos grazing on land and depositing waste in the river introduces enormous quantities of organic material into the aquatic system. This material feeds the river's food web from the bottom up, fueling the algae and aquatic plants, which feed the invertebrates, which feed the fish, which feed everything that eats fish. Rivers with healthy hippo populations have been shown to support significantly higher fish biomass than equivalent rivers without them. The hippo is, in the most literal sense, feeding the river. None of this is intentional. The hippo does not know that its paths direct the rain, that its wallows shelter other species, that its waste enriches the water. It is simply doing what it has always done, in the way it has always done it. But the landscape around an intact hippo population is measurably different from the landscape around a river that has lost its hippos. The paths grow over, the wallows dry, the river runs cleaner and poorer. The fish population thins, the birds shift their patterns. The hippo's presence is a fact that hundreds of other species have quietly organized their lives around for as long as hippos have been in Africa, which, as it turns out, is a very long time indeed. There is something happening in the river right now that sounds, when you first hear it, like it should be impossible. A hippo is asleep at the bottom of the river. Its body is heavy and still, resting against the riverbed with the complete, released weight of an animal in deep sleep. Its eyes are closed, its muscles are relaxed, its breathing is slow, and its awareness of the world above the waterline is minimal. By any reasonable measure, it is fully asleep, and every 3 to 5 minutes, without waking, it rises to the surface. The body does this on its own. There is no moment of consciousness, no decision, no stirring from sleep to accomplish the task of breathing. The muscles involved in the ascent are operating below the level of awareness, driven by a reflex so deeply embedded in the animal's neurology that it functions independently of whether the brain is awake or not. The hippo surfaces. The nostrils open. 1, 2, 3 breaths are taken, quickly and efficiently. The nostrils close. The body sinks back to the bottom. The whole sequence takes less than 30 seconds, and the hippo remains asleep throughout. This reflex is called involuntary surfacing, and it is one of the most extraordinary adaptations in the mammalian world. It requires a nervous system capable of maintaining the distinction between the parts of the brain that are resting and the parts that are managing survival critical functions, and routing the breathing reflex through the latter group completely, so that it never needs to disturb the former. Think about what this means. The hippo has solved, in a way no land mammal has come close to matching, the fundamental problem of being an air-breathing animal that sleeps in water. It has separated the act of breathing from the act of being awake. Breathing happens. Sleep happens. The two do not interfere with each other. The body manages both simultaneously, without asking the conscious mind to coordinate between them. Researchers who have observed sleeping hippos from above the water describe the surfacing sequence as almost mechanical in its consistency. The interval between surfacings is remarkably regular, 3 to 5 minutes, so maintained through hours of sleep with very little variation. The head rises at the same angle each time. The nostrils open at the same moment relative to the surface. The number of breaths taken per surfacing is consistent. It is a program running on a timer, embedded so deeply in the body's operating system that sleep cannot interrupt it. What is perhaps most striking is the behavior immediately after each surfacing. The nostrils close, actively, not passively. Hipponostrils are muscular, and the closing of them as the animal submerges is a deliberate, though unconscious, action. The water does not simply get kept out by a seal. The nostril muscles close against the water with a small, distinct, muscular effort that is visible, if you are watching closely, as a slight tensing at the top of the snout just before submersion. Even in sleep, the body is doing this correctly, every 3 to 5 minutes, all night long. So there is a reason this image is worth sitting with tonight of all nights. Your body also breathes without your conscious direction. Right now, as this story carries you closer to sleep, your breathing is slowing and deepening and shifting from the slightly deliberate rhythm of wakefulness toward the slower, more autonomous rhythm of a body that has handed over control to the parts of itself that do not need instruction. The diaphragm will keep moving when your awareness of it stops, and the chest will keep rising and falling after your mind has let go of the day. The body knows how to breathe in sleep. It has always known. The hippo simply took this truth further than any other land mammal and built an entire life around it. It went all the way into the water and trusted the reflex completely. It did not stay at the surface to make breathing easier. It went to the bottom, where it was most comfortable, and let the body handle the rest. The water is dark and warm around it. The breathing continues. The hippo sleeps on. There is an hour before sunrise in Africa that belongs to no part of the day. The darkness is still complete, but something in it has changed. The deepest weight of the night has passed. The air, which cools steadily from midnight onward, has reached its lowest temperature and is beginning the long, slow climb back towards the heat of the coming day. The stars in the west are still bright, but the eastern sky has begun to release its black in the smallest possible increments. Not yet light, but a darkness that is somehow less total than it was an hour ago. And along the river, something is happening. The hippos are coming back. After their hours of grazing on the dark floodplains, the pods are returning to the water along the same ancient paths they walked out on. The movement is unhurried. A large male pauses at the top of the bank, nostrils reading the air, before beginning the descent to the water. A female with a calf close to her flank navigates a steeper section of bank with the careful, deliberate weight placement of a very large animal that knows exactly how much it weighs. The path is worn smooth. The bank at the water's edge has been used so many thousands of times that the soil here is packed hard, and the transition from land to water is a gradual slope rather than a sudden drop. The first hippo to enter makes a sound as it goes in, a low, resonant exhale, something between a grunt and a sigh, that carries across the water and into the reeds on the far bank. This is not a warning call. It is the sound of an animal re-entering the element it is built for, the sound of weight being handed back to the water. Others follow. Each entry produces its own version of the same sound. The river receives them, one after another, the water level rising imperceptibly as the mass of the returning pod redistributes itself across the familiar stretch of river. The surface, which was nearly still in their absence, develops a slow, irregular texture of overlapping ripples that gradually settles as each animal finds its place and stills. The calls begin, and the first calls of a hippopod resettling in the early morning are different from the territorial calls of midday, or the alert calls that travel upstream and down in response to disturbance. They are low and frequent, a series of short, deep rumbles passed between animals in close proximity, each one followed quickly by a response from a nearby individual. Researchers who have studied hippo vocal behavior describe this exchange as a contact calling sequence, a rapid re-establishment of the pod's acoustic map after hours spent dispersed across the landscape. In plain terms, they are checking in. Each animal announces itself. Each announcement is acknowledged. The pod, which was a dozen separate animals scattered across kilometers of dark grassland an hour ago, reconstitutes itself in sound, each voice confirming its position, its presence, its continued belonging to the group. For the calves returning from their first or second season of night grazing, this morning vocal exchange is both reassuring and instructive. The sounds of the adults settling around them, the specific calls of their mothers, and the familiar voices of the other females in the nursery group are the acoustic equivalent of the warm, known stretch of river itself. This is the sound of being back, the sound of the day beginning in the right place, with the right animals, in the right water. And the sky is pale grey now at the horizon. The first birds are starting, a single call, then another, then the gradual layering of dawn sound that the African riverbank does every morning without variation or exception. The surface of the river catches the first thin light and returns it as a long, flat shimmer. And across the water, the pod has gone quiet. The checking in is complete. The pod is whole. Every animal is accounted for, positioned and settling into the stillness of the coming day, so the long darkness is ending. The river holds everything that needs to be held, and somewhere in the warm water, the first hippo to return this morning has already closed its eyes. A hippo born into a river in the Luangwa Valley of Zambia, or along the banks of the Mara in Kenya, or in the slow water of the Okavango in Botswana, will, in all likelihood, die in that same river 40 or 50 years later. Not in the same country, not in the same general region, in the same stretch of water, the same bend of the same river, the same mud banks, the same grazing floodplains, visited on the same seasonal schedule, the same shallow pool where its mother brought it in its first weeks of life. The hippo's world is, by the standards of most large mammals, astonishingly small in geography. And within that small geography, it becomes, over decades, one of the most intimately knowledgeable creatures on Earth about one specific place. See, 40 years in the same river means 40 complete cycles of the rainy season and the dry. 40 years of watching the river rise and fall, of navigating the changes in the water's depth and temperature, of adjusting grazing routes as the grassland shifts with each season's rainfall. 40 years of learning which sections of bank are stable and which crumble unpredictably, which pools hold water into the dry season and which are gone by August, which grass grows first after the rains and where, on which specific bends of the floodplain it grows densest and sweetest. This knowledge accumulates the way silt accumulates in a slow river, almost imperceptibly, layer by layer, until the depth of it is remarkable. An older hippo, particularly an older female who has raised multiple calves in the same territory, carries a model of that river system in her body that no map could fully represent. She does not carry it consciously, the way a person might recall the streets of a city they grew up in. She carries it in the way the body carries any deeply repeated experience, as reflex, as instinct, as the immediate, unerring sense of where things are and what they mean that only comes from having been somewhere long enough for the place to become part of you. This depth of knowledge has real consequences for the pod that lives alongside such an animal. During drought years, when the river drops to levels that younger hippos have never experienced, the older females navigate to water sources that junior animals would not know existed. Secondary pools, underground seeps, distant river sections that hold water longer than the main channel. They have seen this before. Their bodies remember where the water was last time. During flood years, they know which areas of bank will be cut off by rising water and which remain accessible. They know, from experience that spans multiple generations of calves raised and cycles of wet and dry weathered, the difference between a river in a temporary mood and a river signaling something that requires a genuine response. There is a name in ecology for the value that old individuals bring to animal groups through the knowledge they carry. They are called repositories of ecological memory. The phrase is clinical, but what it describes is profound. When an old elephant matriarch dies, the herd she led loses access to drought refuges she knew, and they do not. When old hippo females are removed from a population, the pod loses a map of the river that took 50 years to draw. The river itself, meanwhile, continues. It does not know the hippo. It does not store the relationship. It simply runs, as it has run for millions of years, through the landscape it carved long before any hippo arrived at its banks. But the hippo knows the river, every deep pool and shallow crossing, every reliable bank and crumbling overhang, every seasonal shift in temperature, colour, smell and sound that marks the turning of another year in a life spent in one long, patient, deepening intimacy with a single place. 50 years in the same water, not because the hippo cannot leave, because there is no reason to. The river is enough. The river has always been enough. The hippo's skin is one of the most sensitive organs in the African animal world. This is not an obvious fact. The skin is thick, up to 6 centimeters deep in places, and it has the visual quality of something built for toughness rather than sensitivity. It looks armored. The grey, almost mineral surface of a dry hippo in midday light resembles something geological rather than biological. You would not look at it and think, this is a surface capable of exquisite perception. But beneath that outer layer, at the hippo's skin is laced with sensory receptors that respond to the subtlest changes in the water moving against it. Pressure changes, temperature gradients, the direction and speed of the current, the slow pulse of water displaced by a large body moving somewhere else in the river. The hippo, resting with its eyes half closed and its calls reduced to occasional low rumbles, is receiving a constant, a detailed stream of information through its skin about everything happening in the water around it. The water talks to the hippo, and the hippo, at a level below conscious attention, is always listening. The pressure receptors in the skin are particularly refined around the face and snout, an area of the hippo's body that is in constant contact with the water's surface. The slightest change in the tension of the water at the surface, the kind of change produced by a raindrop, a swimming insect, or the bow wave of a very small animal moving along the bank, registers in the sensory cells of the snout and is processed automatically by the brain. Not as something that requires a response in every case, but as information filed and available, building a picture of the river that complements the visual and acoustic data the eyes and ears are collecting simultaneously. The temperature sensitivity of the skin serves a different purpose. Hippos in river systems that have seasonal temperature variation use the temperature of the water to orient themselves within the river. Warm surface water versus cooler, deeper water signals depth and position. The temperature of inflowing streams versus the main river channel can indicate the direction of water movement, and the sudden cooling of the water in a section of river that has been in shadow can indicate the position of the sun and therefore the time of day. Information that helps the hippo calibrate its internal clock without needing to surface and look. This is a creature that reads its world through its skin in a way that most land animals simply cannot. The skin is not a barrier between the hippo and the water. It is the primary interface, and the place where the hippo ends and the river begins is not a firm line, but a zone of exchange, where the water's information flows inward, and the hippo's warmth, waste, and secretions flow outward in a constant two-way conversation between animal and environment. Think of your own skin for a moment, the temperature of the air against your arms right now, the pressure of the surface you are lying or sitting on, the slight difference in temperature between exposed skin and covered skin. And these sensations are available to you, but most of the time they sit below the threshold of conscious attention, present but not focused on. The body is receiving them whether you attend to them or not. Now, imagine that sensitivity multiplied and refined across millions of years of evolution to detect changes in a medium 4 times denser than air, that carries information faster and further than air can. Imagine being that receptive to the world around you, not in the anxious and overwhelming way of a nervous system flooded with input, but in the calm, continuous way of a body perfectly calibrated to its environment, receiving information without being disturbed by it, knowing without needing to think about knowing. The hippo rests in the warm water, and the warm water fills every inch of skin with its quiet, constant communication. Temperature, pressure, current, the position of other bodies, the pulse of the river's own breathing. The hippo receives all of it, and in the receiving, it is completely, utterly at home. You can feel it before it arrives. The air changes first. A heaviness enters it, a thick, electric quality that sits differently in the lungs than the dry air of the long months before. The sky at the horizon develops a particular shade of grey-green that has no equivalent in any other season. The birds go quiet in a way that is different from the quietness of heat. Not stillness, but attention. Every living thing along the river orienting toward the change that is coming. And then the first drops fall on the surface of the river. Each one makes a perfect small circle, and the circles multiply until the whole surface is moving, a fine silver percussion that fills the air with a sound. That the African river has not made in months. The rains have come. For the hippo, this is not merely a weather event. It is a transformation of the world. In the dry season, the hippo's river is a constrained thing. Lower, warmer, concentrated. The pod occupies a smaller stretch of water because there is less water to occupy. The grazing range on land is limited by the distance from the river that an animal needing daily water immersion can comfortably travel. The grass on the floodplains has been grazed to the ground in the most accessible areas. The wallows are shallow, the mud thick and warm, at the density of hippos in the remaining water, high enough that the social dynamics become compressed and occasionally tense. The rains change all of this within days. The river rises, not slowly. In a good rainy season, an African river can rise several meters within 48 hours of sustained heavy rainfall upstream. The water spreads across the floodplain, filling the hippo paths with running water, deepening the wallows, reconnecting isolated pools with the main channel. And the territory of the pod expands as the water expands. Animals that have been sharing a tight stretch of river for months suddenly have room to spread. The grass responds with a speed that is almost startling. Within days of the first significant rains, new growth pushes through the baked dry surface of the floodplain. Bright, intense green, dense with the nutrients that the soil has been storing through the dry months. This new grass is exactly what the hippo's body needs after months of feeding on coarser, drier, less nutritious vegetation. The protein content is high. The moisture content is high. The hippo's gut, which processes enormous volumes of grass daily, receives a sudden abundance after a long period of relative scarcity. The hippo's body responds to this abundance in the way that all large seasonal mammals respond when the lean months end, by eating more, gaining condition, replenishing the fat reserves that the dry season drew down. Female hippos in good body condition at the start of the dry season are better mothers the following year. Their calves are born larger and develop faster. The rainy season is not just pleasant. It is the biological reset that makes everything that follows possible. The behavior of the pod during the rains has a quality that researchers and field observers consistently describe as relaxed. Or the compression and competition of the dry season ease. Animals spread out. Grazing ranges expand. The social tensions that build in any group of large mammals, forced to share too little space over too many months, dissipate as the space increases. There are more calls, more social interactions, more of the slow, close contact exchanges. Bodies pressing alongside each other in the now deeper water. Low rumbles passed between individuals that look, to honest observers, like the expressions of animals that are simply more comfortable. The river, swollen with rain, moves faster and louder. The banks on either side are green now, the dry brown landscape of the previous months buried under the new growth that the rain unlocks from the waiting soil. The air smells of wet earth and grass, and the particular clean mineral scent of fresh rainwater mixing into river water. The hippo sinks a little deeper into the risen river. The water, cool from the rain, surrounds it completely. Every pressure sensor in the skin registers the change in temperature, the new current, the slight shift in the river's chemistry. The body settles. The season has turned. Everything that the dry months required the hippo to manage and endure has been washed away. The river is full again. The Sahara Desert, the largest hot desert on Earth, was not always a desert. 10,000 years ago, a short time in geological terms, a long time in human ones, the Sahara was a landscape of lakes, rivers, and grasslands. It received significant rainfall. It supported large populations of animals. And among those animals, living in its rivers and shallow lakes, in the same way their descendants live in African rivers today, were hippopotamuses. We know this from fossils and from rock art. Paintings made by the people who lived in the Green Sahara and who depicted the animals around them with enough accuracy that species are identifiable. Hippos appear in this art, swimming in rivers that have been dry for thousands of years, in a landscape that is now one of the most inhospitable places on the planet. The animals are drawn with the confidence of artists depicting something familiar, something they saw every day. But the hippo's history goes back much further than the Green Sahara. The genus Hippopotamus, in forms recognizably similar to the modern animal, has been present in Africa for somewhere between 2 and 3 million years. The wider family from which modern hippos descended goes back further still, to animals that lived across Africa, Europe, and Asia in the Miocene epoch, several million years before our own genus appeared in the fossil record. Hippos once lived in England, in France, so in Germany. Fossils of hippopotamus species have been found throughout southern and central Europe, deposited during the warm interglacial periods when the climate of Europe was sufficiently tropical to support African megafauna this far north. The Thames River in London, now a cool tidal waterway through a northern city, once had hippos in it. They grazed on the banks where the Houses of Parliament now stand. These European populations were not immigrants that wandered north in small numbers, and they were established, successful populations that lived in the river systems of Europe for hundreds of thousands of years during warm periods, and retreated back to Africa when the climate cooled. The hippo tested Europe and found it acceptable, then found it too cold and came home. The African populations from which modern hippos descend survived all of this. The climate cycles, the ice ages, the shifts in vegetation and hydrology that accompanied each change in global temperature, and they survived the loss of the Green Sahara, which cut off North African hippo populations from sub-Saharan ones, and eventually eliminated the northern populations entirely. They survived the Pleistocene megafaunal extinctions that removed dozens of large mammal species from Africa and every other continent. The same event that ended the woolly mammoth, the saber-toothed cat, and the giant ground sloth. The hippo is still here. It has been here through changes that ended most of the large animals that were alive at the same time as its ancestors. It has watched from its rivers as the landscape around it was transformed by climate and by the growing presence and impact of human beings. It has retreated from its former range in North Africa and the Middle East as those environments became too dry to sustain it. But in the rivers of sub-Saharan Africa, it remains, in a form so close to its ancient ancestors that the differences are minor. The basic design worked. Evolution saw no reason to change it significantly. There is a quietness that comes from age this deep, not the quietness of something diminished or fading, but the quietness of something that has been tested and confirmed so many times that it no longer needs to prove itself. The hippo in the river tonight has never heard of the Green Sahara or the hippos of ancient England. It does not know it has outlasted ice ages. It does not know about the woolly mammoth, or the saber-toothed cat, or any of the others that shared its world for a while, and then were gone. It knows the river. It knows the grass on the floodplain, and the weight of the rain when the season turns, and the sounds of the pod settling into the water before dawn. It knows what has kept its line alive for millions of years, and it keeps doing exactly that. Long before the first scientist waded into an African river with a notebook and a waterproof camera, the hippo was already known. Every community that has built its life along an African river, the Luo people of the Nile Basin, the Zulu of the Thukela River, the Banyoro and Acholi of Uganda's waterways, the fishing communities of the Congo and Zambezi, and dozens of smaller rivers across sub-Saharan Africa, has lived alongside the hippo for as long as the oral record goes back. And the oral record goes back a very long way. The knowledge accumulated in these communities about hippo behavior is not anecdotal. It is systematic, detailed, and in many respects more nuanced than the scientific literature compiled over the last century of formal study. It was generated not by periodic observation visits, but by daily proximity, by people whose fishing, farming, water use, and travel were all shaped by the presence of hippos in their rivers, and who could not afford the luxury of approximation. Communities along the Nile and its tributaries developed precise, reliable knowledge of hippo movement patterns, when pods would be in specific areas of the river, which hours of the night and early morning saw peak movement of grazing animals crossing travel routes, which stretches of river were carving areas where female hippos with newborns were present, and encounters should be treated with particular caution. This knowledge was functional and safety critical. It was taught to children as part of the basic curriculum of living in the landscape. In many communities, the hippo occupied a place in the symbolic and ceremonial life of the people that reflected a long, complicated relationship rather than simple fear or utility. So hippos appear in the cosmologies of multiple African cultures as figures associated with the deep water, with the hidden world beneath the surface, with the qualities of power held in stillness. The Taweret of ancient Egyptian religion, a protective goddess depicted as an upright female hippopotamus, was one of the most widely worshipped protective figures in the Egyptian pantheon. She was associated with fertility, birth, and the protection of mothers and children. So the hippo's connection to water, to the nursing of young in warm shallows, to the fierce protectiveness of a mother pod, is visible in this iconography, even across 5,000 years. The relationship between hippo communities and human ones was not uncomplicated. Hippos damaged crops. They competed for grazing land. They posed real physical danger to people fishing or traveling in small boats on rivers the hippos considered their territory. And the management of this coexistence, knowing how close was too close, which behaviors signaled genuine threat, and which were assertion, when to give way, and when a river section could be safely used, required exactly the kind of detailed, generationally transmitted knowledge that these communities spent centuries developing. What is striking, when you read the traditional knowledge of communities that have lived alongside hippos for generations, is how much of what they understood is confirmed by formal scientific study, and how much of the formal scientific literature of the 20th century was, in effect, rediscovering things that were already known along the riverbanks. The hippo's nocturnal grazing patterns, the stability of pod territories over many years, the role of older females in leading and organizing the group, the particular danger of mothers with very young calves, or the communication behavior of animals separated from the pod, known, all of it known and taught, and lived alongside for thousands of years before the first academic paper was written. Two ways of knowing, arriving by very different paths at the same river, looking at the same animal, with the same combination of respect and care. The hippo has never acknowledged either of them. It does not know it has been watched for this long, studied this closely, incorporated into this many human stories and songs and warnings and ceremonies. It does not know about the scientists or the communities or the ancient Egyptian goddess with its face. It knows the river, and the river, as always, keeps the memory that the hippo does not need to carry. There is a particular quality of stillness that belongs only to very heavy things fully at rest. A stone at the bottom of a river has it. An old tree rooted deep in soft earth has it. A mountain range at dusk, or when the light is going and the shadows fill the valleys and everything above the tree line is grey and absolute and utterly unmoving, that has it too. It is not the stillness of emptiness or of death or of something that was never alive. It is the stillness of something so thoroughly present in its own existence that no part of its energy is directed outward. No performance, no readiness, just the full, settled weight of a thing being exactly what it is, exactly where it is, with nothing held back. The hippo in deep water has this stillness. Late in the afternoon, in the full heat of the African day, a pod of hippos in a deep section of river reaches a level of collective calm that is almost visible as a quality of the air above them. The calls have quieted to occasional, barely audible contact rumbles, just enough sound to maintain the acoustic map of the group, not enough to disturb the deep rest each animal is settling into, or the movement at the surface is minimal, the slow rise and fall of a breath taken without waking, the slight drift of a tail in the current, the imperceptible rocking of a body held by water that is itself barely moving. Nothing is happening, and in that nothing, everything the hippo is fully present. This is not an absence of life. It is life at its most concentrated, stripped of all the expenditure that normally dilutes it. No thermoregulation effort because the water is the right temperature. No locomotion because there is nowhere to go and no reason to go anywhere. No social negotiation because the pod's dynamics have settled into the comfortable familiarity of animals who have known each other for years in a territory they know completely. No feeding because the grass will be there tonight, as it was last night, as it will be tomorrow night. All of the things that consume the energy and attention of most living creatures are simply not present in this moment, in this water, for these animals. What remains is the breathing, the slow, automatic pulse of a body doing the minimum required to sustain itself, the weight fully handed over to the river, the skin receiving the water's quiet communication, without the brain needing to act on any of it, the eyes, if they are open at all, receiving the light without processing it into anything requiring a response. This is the deepest level of the hippo's rest. Not sleep, exactly, because some degree of awareness is always maintained. Not wakefulness, because none of the activities of wakefulness are present. Something between the two, available only to an animal that has spent millions of years perfecting the art of existing in exactly this state. They're field researchers who have sat quietly at the river's edge in the deep afternoon and watched a resting pod report a quality of the experience that goes beyond observation. There is something in witnessing this level of stillness in a living animal, particularly one this large, this old as a species, this completely at peace, that is difficult to describe without sounding less than scientific. A sense of something restored to its correct proportion. Of the world, in this small stretch of river at this particular hour, being exactly as it should be, heavy, warm, slow, real. The hippo does not know it is being watched. It does not know anything at this particular depth of rest, beyond the temperature of the water and the presence of the pod around it. It does not carry the weight of its own history, its ecological importance, its millions of years of lineage. It does not carry the day's events or tomorrow's plans, because it has none. It carries nothing. The river carries it, and the river, as it always does, is more than equal to the weight. We have come a long way tonight. We started at the edge of a slow African river at dusk, watching a shape so still it looked like part of the landscape, and from there we went deeper, into the ancient family tree that connects the hippo to the whale, into the river that is not a place the hippo visits, but the very substance of its existence, into the skin that reads the water, the eyes that watch from the waterline, the voice that speaks in two worlds at once. We followed the hippo into the dark on its ancient paths, and we learned what it means to carry enormous weight and have a place that takes it. We went down to the riverbed where breathing happens without waking, and we sat at the bank in the hour before dawn, when the pod reassembles itself in sound. We spent 50 years in one river and watched what deep familiarity with one place does to an animal. And we stood in the rain when the season turned and the river rose and everything that had been constrained and dry was released all at once. And now we are here, at the place where the story ends and sleep begins. The hippo is in the river right now, not a metaphor. A real animal, in real water, in a real river, somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa. The Luangwa, the Mara, the Zambezi, the Okavango, a dozen others, resting in the warm, dark water, with its pod settled around it, and its body held by the current and the mud of the riverbed pressing softly against its feet. It has put down everything it was carrying, the full weight of itself, 4,000 kilograms of bone and muscle and dense, ancient skin, has been handed to the water, which receives it completely, without effort, without complaint. The river is not strained by this weight. It is built for it. It has been receiving this weight from animals very much like this one for millions of years. Your body is doing the same thing right now, or it is very close to doing it. The weight of today, everything you carried through its hours, the things that felt urgent and the things that felt unfinished, and the low, persistent hum of everything that continues to require something from you, does not need to be solved before you are allowed to rest. The hippo does not wait for the river to be perfect before it enters. It enters because the river is there, and because the river has always been enough, and because the body knows, at a level deeper than thinking, that the weight can be put down now. Let it go. Let the surface you are resting on receive what you have been carrying, and let the breathing slow into the rhythm the body already knows, the one it used last night and the night before and every night of your life that has ever ended in sleep. You do not need to instruct it. You never have. The hippo does not think about breathing underwater. The reflex was there before the thinking. Your body's sleep reflex is the same, older than your awareness of it, more reliable than your management of it. It will do what it does if you simply stop interrupting it with the effort of staying awake. The river is warm, the pod is quiet, the weight is going. If this story helped you find your way to rest tonight, there is one small thing we would love before you go. Tap the like button, and if you have not already, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow night we are going somewhere extraordinary again. Another ancient animal, another quiet world, so another story built specifically to carry you gently out of the day and into the deep rest your body is asking for right now. Your spot will be here. The river will be here. You have everything you need. Now, let the weight go. Sleep well.